ISO Productions presents another instructional video tutorial from ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Well, hello there, my fellow FileMaker friends, fans, and developers. This is Matt Petrowski bringing you another FileMaker tutorial over at FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a little bit of a break from the series that I've been working on, the data separation model, and we're going to be talking about pre-capturing data. And I'm going to show you a little bit about using sessions and field abstraction. And just before that, I'm going to show you a nice little technique that I've been using in a lot of my solutions that takes advantage of using global variables, where typically you would have to have something like a global field in order to get the screen to refresh. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about. Alrighty, so first things first, let's talk about what's on screen. What you have in front of you is a theme that I'm working on that's going to be released as part of my Theme Studio product. Now, what I came across was this thought process that the iPad and the iPhone, those are great tools. They come with a great keyboard that allows a user to enter data. But there are times that you do not want the user to even have that degree of complexity. Sometimes you want things to be so absolutely simple that you make it very, very difficult to mess things up. So I'm creating a theme called Kiosk, and it's basically just an onboard screen keyboard. Now we'll take a look at how I've implemented this, but to walk through the solution, basically what I wanted was a FileMaker shell, let's call it, that I could throw onto an iPad or on an iPhone anywhere just for the purpose of simple data collection. The first issue that you come across with this, let's say for example this was used on an iPad as a kiosk, or FileMaker was bound in kiosk mode and made so that this will work on just your standard PC with a touchscreen. Typically what you want is you want to walk users through a process. But you know, as well as I do, kids walk up to kiosks, they just start mashing on buttons. People can be handed something, they're in the process of signing up for something, and then they change their mind, they say, no, that's not what I want to do. So the point of this video is to explain how you can pre-capture your data before you actually commit it to your ultimate end destination. And that's exactly what this file does. I basically just started this process simply because I was creating all of the interface elements for a kiosk theme. So in this example, you can see that I have simply a portal right here up in the top, and I've got the different pieces of information that I want to collect. Now, knowing that from one solution to the next, these pieces of information may change completely, I wanted to have something that included some abstraction, making it much easier for me to reuse this same template or this same theme. So as you can see here, I can select on what I want to click on. I've got this nice little prompt, but one of the things that I wanted to show you before I actually head into this concept of pre-capturing data is a little technique that will be a nice little nugget that will give you an extra little bit that you can use in your FileMaker solutions. And that is this shift right here. It's not the shift key itself, but it's how I've actually manipulated and worked with this shift key. One of the greatest things that FileMaker, I believe it was 10, I don't know, maybe 9 did have variables, but in essence what we have now are this concept of local and global variables. Now, holding a lot of things in those little tools or those little storage boxes is absolutely great. Way back in the day, we used to have to create global fields for everything. So what happens is you get this ability to click on something and change a global variable. Now, if I bring up the data viewer, which I will bring on screen right here, you can see this value that I have right there, keyboard shift. Now that is a global variable that I'm using in order to control other things. In particular, you can see this keyboard. So what happens is when I click on this object right here, you notice that I get this change. Typically, what you have to do when you're working with global variables, in order to make them invoke some type of change within the user interface, you have to use a global field, or the field has to be indexed and referenced by other things. As I go into layout mode, you're going to see very clearly that what I have here for the keyboard is simply a repeating field. I wanted to be able to use this one repeating field for everything that the user might click on. This includes lowercase and uppercase. So the way that I'm passing these keys back to the script is simply by taking whatever their contents are within that particular repetition, using FileMaker's get calculation repetition number function. I don't know exact name, but that's in essence what's going on. So when I go back into browse mode, what you can see is that I'm simply changing from lower to upper. Now, if we take a look at the actual keyboard, which will go into the fields, there is just this one field that I have right here called keyboard. You can see that it's a calculation. It's got 36 repetitions. And here's what I wanted to be able to do with this keyboard. I wanted to be able to use this keyboard potentially for other languages or for other characters. So you can see that what I've done is I've laid it out so that I have row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. Simply just emulating your standard QWERTY keyboard. And I've put in the keys. Now I know that I needed to support both lower and upper, so that was simply a matter of whether or not the shift key was pushed down, just like you would find on an iPad or any other device. So you can see right here that I say if the keyboard shift global variable exists, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change everything that was lowercase into uppercase, and that's really all there is to it. The trick with this is, and there's that function, get calculation repetition number is what the actual calculation is. So what I'm doing is each key has a number, and I simply pass that as a script parameter, taking whatever the contents of the repeating calculation is. Won't go into super great detail if that isn't super clear, but in essence what I'm trying to show you here is that there is a way to use global variables and force the screen to refresh, but only in this immediate area, only on the object that is clicked. So that's the key in terms of how this works. Let's take a look at what's going on. We'll go into layout mode, and then I will move off my overlay, which is simply all of my highlights and everything. Let's zoom in just so we can see a little bit more of what's going on. Hide that. And what you can see right here is I've got the little star, so I have a script trigger on this particular object. Now the on object enter is a commit, but here's the trick in how this works. It doesn't matter what the button is. You can do this whole process completely script free. Let's walk through this. I could, for example, add a new button. Now, if I wanted that button to set a particular variable, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that button go to a particular object. What object? The object itself. If I double click this, you can see that I have the go to object set for this button. So here's how this works. If we take this button right here, I move the inspector on screen, and I'm going to give this object a name. Now here's the cool thing. It also works with text and other objects that formerly, it's as soon as you assign something to be a button, that then, by virtue of having a name, can be something that you go to. The trick is once you go to that object, you have to get off of the object. That's where the script trigger comes in. So this is a two-part situation. First, we have the name, and I'll just simply call this button. Let's turn off my caps lock there. And there it is. And there we go, button. So now that I have named this object, normally I can double click it and it won't do anything, but I'll go up to the format, I'll say button setup, and the thing that I want to do is I simply want to go to the object, and the object that I want to go to would normally be simply named button. But here's the trick. Rather than just specifying the button, you're going to specify whatever logic you want with regards to setting a global variable. So here I would actually do something like this. I would do let global equal whatever you want. Calculation can be whatever. And then I'm simply going to return the result of the name of the object that I want to go to. So in essence, what I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of the fact that I have the calculation dialog box here. I can set any global or locally scoped variable to whatever I want and still target the object that I want to get to. So what happens, button, we need to make that a literal. So there we go. So now that is actually, the calculation is doing what it needs to do. I'm actually just using this goTo object. I have not created a new script. What would happen is once I get on this particular object, I'm going to format this. It is a button. I am going to the object. What I'm going to do is I'm then going to put a script trigger on this. Now the script trigger needs to be something where you simply commit the record. Because what happens is, remember, when you use the goTo object, that object will become highlighted, or it will have the frame bounding around that object. So in this case, as soon as you enter the object, you're going to do something like just a simple commit. So that's normally what this particular script would be. And we say OK. And that is what's going to give you the ability to use global variables and automatically control the highlighting. So for example, if this was just a simple toggle that was toggling a Boolean value in a global variable, and I was using conditional formatting in order to show whether it's on or off. In other words, let's set that conditional formatting. We will select and we will go to, well, in this case I can't. I would have, because I selected an oval object or a rounded corner object, I would have to select, for example, a text object. So using text in this particular case would allow me to use conditional formatting. But I think you get the idea. Using the conditional formatting would allow me to show whether or not that toggle was on. And in fact, this is something that I do frequently with checkboxes, or with checks. It allows you to use on-off checkboxes. I did that by holding down Option V on the Mac in order to make that checkbox. And normally what I'll do is I'll make the checkbox the same color as the background, and as soon as I set the global variable, I then am able to refresh. Normally you have to run the refresh script step, and on Windows this causes a lot of flashing, which you don't want. That's exactly what everything I'm explaining avoids. A lot of flashing. You're able to toggle just that area, because once you get to that object and once you get a commit, then you're off of the object. You've committed the record. Even though nothing has changed on that record, you don't get the screen flash, but you do get the update of the visual display of the conditional formatting. So this is the solution to the problem of the fact that you can set global variables, yet they won't have any impact on the redraw of the screen unless you call a refresh, which on the Windows side of things causes flashing, which is our problem. So that's our first little tip that we have out of this. And the rest of the video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what I have here in terms of a starter solution for something that would be a rapid development or a rapid environment for collecting data and pre-capturing that data before you go to your end result. So let's take a look at that and let me walk through what we have in this particular file. Alrighty, so now let's walk through what I'm talking about with regards to pre-capturing data before it actually ends up in your data model. The first thing I'd like to show you is the relationship graph and point out how this whole thing is working. I want you to pay attention to the fact that this table occurrence right here, data, is my ultimate or my end desired location for the data to reside. With respect to my FileMaker application, what I'm doing is I'm capturing everything into this notion of what are called sessions. Now, a session, quite simply, it can mean different things to different people, but in this particular implementation, a session is just a period of time when somebody goes up, starts a process, and then either completes that process or abandons it. So it's the period of time that the user is interacting with the data collection process. And given that this would be a kiosk, that could either be very short, where they just come in, bang on some keys, let's say it's a kid, and walks away, or it could be somewhat long, depending on how long the process is. So everything with regards to the data collection happens all within these three tables of kiosk, which is the interface, collect, which is what information do you want to collect, and then the session, what is the information that was collected for this period of time. Note that none of it is connected to the data table. Now, this data table could very well be an external data source. It could be in MySQL. It could be in FileMaker. It could be in another FileMaker file. It really doesn't matter. The whole notion is the fact that it is completely disassociated. Now, that abstraction part that comes in is such that I want to be able to use this template in multiple different scenarios. So let's take a walk through how this actually works. You can see that I've got the kiosk, which is the main interface. That's what the layout is tied on. I have a collect portal, which is basically, here is a portal, and you can see it's a Cartesian product showing me all of the items that I might want to collect. Now this could vary if you have multiple different processes. Of course, your relationship graph would look a little bit different. Collect current is what is being collected right now out of all of the things that are possible that could be collected. The session is what is the data that's being collected during this session, and I also put in some validation. And the values that you collect for a particular session, you want to know if you've met all of the different, if you've collected all of the possible values that could be collected for that particular session. That's what gives us the ability to use conditional formatting. So it might help if we take a look at this and actually walk through this. So I'll put in my name, M-A-T-T, and then I would probably, the interface isn't complete, this is very much a work in progress, I would have probably a next as soon as criteria is met. Now I click on the next name, you can see right there I've got that little check. What's your last name? So I'll hold Shift and I'll put in P-E-T-R-O-W-S-K-Y. Now the really great thing about controlling your own on-screen keyboard as opposed to using the one on the iPad is you really get to impose the order in which people do things. That is, if you're procedural or how things are done, which would be the case in this particular situation. Then I could put in a telephone number. Let's put in 530-436-5003. Now, one thing you'll notice is that when I move over here, if I go back to that phone number and take off one letter and then move, you can see that the telephone is not actually valid. And that's because I'm using some validation on what I want to collect. The validation, however, is not within the FileMaker field. So let's add that again, that 3, and then we'll go and we'll say how many tickets would I like. I'd like 6 tickets, and I can complete that process. Now, as soon as I click out, and I would potentially have a script trigger so that as soon as something is submitted, then the submit would come active, and then I basically need to rearrange the whole interface. But I think you get the idea. So let me move the layouts on screen, or the tables, so that you can see what's actually happening. So here's what's going on. Remember I mentioned that we have those 3 tables. Kiosk is the interface. Then we have collect, which is what are the pieces of information that you want to collect. Then we have what is collected for that particular session. And then once we have all of those pieces of criteria met, we can then submit it to our data or our back end. And that's exactly what has happened. Everything keys off of whatever this current session ID is. Now I just used a reverse order date timestamp. But you would probably use a UUID or something that would not be replicated if you had, for example, multiple locations. But if you look up here at the collect table, which is currently on the layout collect portal, you can see what I have here in terms of what are the pieces of information I want to have. And right here, quite literally, I have the names that match the field names in the data table. And there's a reason for that. That's because you're simply going to run a loop across all of the values that were collected for that particular session and simply push those into your data table. And that's exactly what you're doing. The great thing about this is that by specifying the name of the field that you want to collect, you can also put the title of the field. You can see quite simply that I have the prompt. So if I go over to the interface and I select on first name, I have what is your first name. If I select on the last name option, it'll say whatever prompt I have right here, telephone, tickets. I think you get the idea. So it gives me a very high degree of flexibility because I can come in and I can simply add a new field that I want to start collecting, or I can rename this to whatever other field I want to push this data into, and it's all pretty dynamic. Now there's a few other pieces that I've got here. Sequence, which controls the order, and that's just a sort that's applied to the relationship. And then also this validation. So what we have in this particular case is I've put a FileMaker calculation within a field where a substitute is normally being used in order to replace what this value is with whatever value is actually supplied. So you can see right here on this, what is your first name? As long as the length of value, this value right here, is greater than 1, then it is valid. So you can see that here I have an auto-enter calculation, or it's actually an auto-enter field that's calculating whether it's valid or not. So if I go over here and actually take off that digit, and now move back over, you can see that now we are not meeting the criteria for the phone. It is not valid, which this gives me the ability to do things within the interface, which I still need a little bit of an update, but right here I would be able to show that there is an X or that this is not valid, and I would be able to make this submit go off. There are definitely some additional script triggers that I'll need to use on this interface once some data modifications are made to a particular field. Fortunately, in this case, all keys on the keyboard are all assigned to the exact same script. So running that script and then actually updating the interface is really not that big of a deal. And because we're on an iPad in this particular case, which this UI is being designed for, I'm not really worried about a screen flicker or a screen refresh problem. So that's basically what I'm doing here. If in this case the submit would not be there, but let's go ahead and complete this process, go up and show our layouts, and I will show the actual data layout. So we open that and we take a look at the fact that we've got no records in here whatsoever. Now there's one really big advantage with the fact that we are isolating our process of data collection from actually where the data resides, in that this session value does not have to be the value that's actually transferred into your data file. It can be a completely separate key value, so that once let's say it's an order process, in this case where we are collecting tickets, and it's not counted as an order, it's counted as a session with a session ID, but as soon as it's submitted, and let's say there's a credit card acquisition process, then once it goes into our data file, that's when it finally gets an order number, and then that order number is given back to the user. You show a receipt, you print a receipt, whatever the process is. That's what's great about using this particular pre-capturing of data and doing this within a session-based model and using the field abstraction, because it really provides you with a very high degree of flexibility. So watch what happens as we click the submit. You can see that what happens is it submits. All of the information is transferred, and as you might expect, this is all basically a simple loop. That what happens is, on the kiosk, I would go over to all of the related records for that particular session, everything based on that particular key. I would simply loop through each of the values. I'm using a relationship to look back into the what do you collect and where does it go. And so by looking at the where does it go field within the field, all I do is I loop through, I create a new record, and I simply push the data into its respective fields. So it really doesn't matter whether it's a SQL backend or whether it's FileMaker. The whole concept here is that the pre-capturing using sessions and the abstraction using fields and validation gives you a high degree of flexibility. If you can envision, let's say you're out and you're collecting a survey data on iPads and you're going to have people input them directly, or you're at a doctor's office and that doctor's office wants to capture all of the information for a new patient. It's extremely easy to do it using this method because you've abstracted everything with regards to the collection and the session with regards to what actually gets commingled with your authoritative data source. So that's what I have for this particular video. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what you can do within FileMaker, how you can treat a particular process, a nice little tip about using the goTo object, taking advantage of the calculation dialog box and setting a global variable, and then once you get to that object, using a script trigger to commit and get off of the object, which will actually force refresh just that one particular area of the screen. So a few little tips there and a nice little concept with regards to using sessions and pre-capturing data. As always, I wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking. We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.